Hello and welcome to DirectX 11 Tutorial 4. Initially in this tutorial I had planned to go over some of the Windows styles and also to go over an issue with how we were creating the rectangle for our window. However, when I started making that tutorial, I realized that it's hard to demonstrate the way that our current window is set up where we are not drawing anything. So I decided to hold off on that until we are actually drawing some things in our window. Instead, in this tutorial, we are going to go over some necessary organization that we need to do for our classes, and then we are going to look at the WindowProc function. So the first thing is we need to make an engine class. So let's go and create a new header file. We are going to call this engine. And we're going to want to add another class called a window container class. Now, the window container class will be exactly what it sounds like. It is a class that contains a render window and will also contain other things that have to do with the render window. For example, we are going to have, let's add the render window header. So we are going to have our render window. And one more thing is this class is going to be inherited by other classes that will have windows tied to them. So for example, our engine will have its own window. So it will inherit from this class. And if we decide that we want to have multiple windows, they could also inherit from this class in the future. We want the render window to be accessible by the engine. So we're going to put that under our protected. Now, let's go back to our engine. And we are going to include the window container. And then we are going to inherit from it. For our engine, we need to make an initialize function similar to how our window has, and we also need to make a process message function. Now, our initialize function, for now, will have the exact same args as the window. So let's go and copy the initialize from the render window. We're going to paste it for the engine. We need to create a definition for that. So let's create the Engine CPP. We're going to include our engine header. And it's pretty much the same idea. For our engine for now, what we are going to do is we're just going to initialize our render window and return the return value from that. In the future, after we initialize our render window, after this is when we would also initialize our graphics for all of our DirectX stuff. Next, we need to make the process messages function. So let's go ahead, just going to return a boolean. And it's going to work exactly like how the process messages from our render window works. In the future, we might add more things to it, but for now, it's just going to be handling that. So let's create that. We're just going to return the render window's process messages. Now let's go back into our source. Instead of including render window, let's include our engine header. And we are going to change this up. Engine. Okay, so I believe this should be functioning the same as what we just had, but let's test it. Okay, so there we go. It's functioning just how we would expect. So now that we have that out of the way, let's review quickly. In our window container, we are going to store the render window, and then we are also going to have some other things, such as we are going to have, once it is created, we're going to have our mouse class, we're going to have our keyboard class, and we are also going to have our WindowProc function for where our WindowProc messages get rerouted to. So for this tutorial, we are not going to get to the mouse and keyboard part. Those are going to be separate. We're going to focus on the WindowProc part. But before we get to that, we have to go back to our render window CPP and change how we are deciding which WindowProc to use in here. Now first, at the top of our render window CPP, instead of including render window, let's include the window container, because we will have to access the window container class. Alright, now let's go down to where we are registering our class. Okay, in our register window class function, you see we are setting a pointer to the function for our WindowProc, and we are using the default WindowProc. We want to use our own WindowProc, so let's go ahead and create one. So this is the default for how your WindowProc should be set up, and we are just returning the actual default one, so this will work just like the default WindowProc. So let's change it from using the default to using ours. And let's go ahead and test this just to make sure it's still working the same. Alright, and it's still working the same. Now the WindowProc is where all of our Windows messages will get dispatched to when we call dispatch message in our process message loop. There are lots of different messages that we can read from this. One example is the Windows message char message. When the Windows message char message is passed in, the key code will be in the W-param field, and information about it can be found in the L-param field. So I'm going to change how the WindowProc function is handled. We're going to have a switch case. And if we receive a char message, we are going to figure out which character was pressed by looking at the W-param field. And the key down works the same way. Now, in the last tutorial, I had said something wrong. I had said that the reason that we use char is because it does not count repeats. Example, if we hold down a character, I had said that it would not repeat that. However, that was incorrect. Both chars and key downs can read repeats. The main difference is char will only capture characters. Char will also capture whether it was capitalized or lowercase. So really, char is used for input, such as chat messages, where key downs would be used for something more like controls. If I put a breakpoint and I go to test this, first let's go ahead and add these brackets, because I can't just declare a variable in that scope. So let's say I press down A. First I get the key down message, and the key code I get is A. And you see that for key downs, it's always the capitalized version of the letter. Let's hit continue. And now we get the character message. The character message is lowercase a, so this would be what I would actually want to show up in an input box if I was typing. So there is a brief example of how the Windows messages work. Now, that being said, knowing what the messages are right here doesn't really help us, because we need a way to relay these messages back to our engine so that we can process them. let's go ahead and remove our cases that we had put in. And what we want to do is add a case for something that is triggered when the window is created. There is a case called NC create, and when the window is actually created, this message is passed in. Now, just to test this, we are going to output something, and we need to return the default WindowProc. So let's test this. And you'll see down in the output that we received the window was created. Now this message is useful because we can use this to pass in a parm to our create window. What we are going to be passing in is a pointer to our object that inherits the window container. So first, if we want to be able to pass in a pointer to our window container, we have to change how render window is initialized to receive this pointer. Let's go back to our render window header. Now we can't include window container here because that would be a circular dependency. So what we will have to do is just forward declare that class. We are going to change initialize so that the first argument is our a pointer to our window container. And now let's go down to the definition and modify that. Let's go back to the Engine CPP where we are calling this. And when we call initialize, we're just going to pass in this for the first argument. Our engine inherits from a window container, so we can just pass in the pointer to engine for that argument. Let's test this just to make sure it runs. Okay, and it runs. Let's go back to our render window CPP, where our WindowProc is. Now, we want to find a way to get the parms that are passed to NC create. But before we do that, we need to actually pass the parms that will be with this message. So up where we create the window, the last argument of create window EX are parms that we will pass. And we just have null pointer. So instead of passing null pointer, we are going to pass in the pointer to the window container. Now let's go back down. Now we want to retrieve that pointer from this message. Here is how we will do that. So first we will create a create struct W pointer, and we are just going to cast the L param to it. We are going to extract that pointer by accessing the LP create parms member of that, and we are going to cast it to our window container pointer. We're just checking if it was null because it should never be null, and if it is null, we're going to log an error, and then we were just going to exit the program with a -1 exit code. Now ignore these because we are not there yet. And then this last code is setting, there's a user data field associated with the window. So we are setting the user data to be this pointer to our container window. We're using set to get that. If we want to actually get that field, then we can retrieve that field using this. So we would create a pointer for our window, and we would call get window long pointer, and we would pass in the handle and say that we're pulling it in from the user data. And right in here we had set it for the user data. If this is a bit confusing, I wouldn't worry too much about it, because this is something that we're really just setting up this one time, and then we probably will never look at again. Next, after we set that pointer, we need to actually reassign this window's WindowProc. So currently, the pointer is pointing to this WindowProc function that we just created. However, once we have it set up and we have the pointer to our container window assigned, we don't actually want to use this WindowProc. In fact, this WindowProc will really just be a setup. We want to call a different WindowProc that will redirect our messages to our window container class. So we are going to call setWindowLongPointer, and we are changing the WindowProc, and we're going to change it to a WindowProc called handleMessageRedirect, because it's supposed to be redirecting the messages to our window container. And we will create that in just a moment. The last thing we are going to do is we are going to call the WindowProc function from our window container. We have not created this, but we will do it in just a moment. So I'm going to remove where we were calling the default WindowProc there. And let's create the handleMessageRedirect WindowProc. The way that this will work is if we receive a close message, we are just going to destroy the window and return out of here. Otherwise, for all other messages, we are going to get the pointer to our container window by calling getWindowLongPointer, and then we are going to return the WindowProc from our window container. So what this will do is it will actually call the WindowProc function inside of our window container class, and our window container class will have access to our mouse and keyboard objects and be able to route the messages to them so that we can read them from our engine class. So the only thing we have left to do is we have to create this WindowProc function inside of our window container class. But before we do that, I want to go ahead and rename this WindowProc function that we initially start with to something more appropriate. I'm going to change it from WindowProc to handleMessageSetup, because this is really just handling up the message setup, and then the WindowProc is changed to this handleMessageRedirect WindowProc that we created. So let's change it, and then down here, for our pointer to our WindowProc function, it's going to start with handleMessageSetup. Now we need to create a WindowProc inside of our window container. So let's go ahead and go to our window container header. Alright, so let's create our function. It's going to return an L result just like WindowProc, and it's going to have the exact same arguments. Let's create a CPP for our window container class. We need to include our window container header. And let's create the definition. So we're just going to return the default WindowProc for now, just to test this, and let's see what happens. Alright, and it works. Now, I realize all of this might have seemed a bit confusing, a little overwhelming, but once this is set up, we are pretty much good to go, and we can just work with this WindowProc function inside of our window container. So just to verify that all the messages are actually being routed to this, we are going to output a debug string. And you see our output is being spammed with WindowProc from window container. So that is all that we are going to cover in this tutorial. In the next tutorial, we are going to create our keyboard class, and our WindowProc will route all of our keyboard messages to the keyboard class. Then we will look into how to read these messages from our engine class, where we are processing messages, and then after that we will do the same thing but for the mouse and then for raw input for the mouse. And once we are done with all of that, then we will finally get into initializing DirectX.